and welcome. I'm Yelizaveta, and as always, it is a pleasure to spend the next few moments with you. Before we begin, a quick announcement to mark your calendars because Horacio Godoy is back with another musicality seminar coming up in January on Saturday the 14th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. So that's a little different than we typically do. Usually we do our workshops on Saturdays from 12 to 1:30, but this time Horacio is going to teach on Saturday the 14th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. And the topic for his seminar this time is going to be D'Arienzo in the golden era between 1935 to 1941, which is a very juicy topic, and I hope that you can make it. So if you can't attend live, there will be a recording, so go ahead and sign up. I'm including the link with all the info in the show notes. Now, today's topic is one that keeps coming up a lot, and it doesn't seem that anybody gets bored when I keep talking about it, because it seems like an issue that really resonates for dancers across the board, men and women of whatever level of experience. And I realize that for some of you, maybe it's not an issue and maybe it's not as relevant, but today I wanted to speak to those of you for whom this thing continues to happen, which is dealing with nervousness, the nerves. Oh, how they get us. And particularly, I'm going to touch upon different types of nervousness and how it can show up in your experience and what sorts of consequences come from it. And then I'll give you some insights into what I do in order to prepare for my Milonga experience. And maybe for me, nervousness is not necessarily the focus of my preliminary activities before I go out, but I feel like some of the strategies that I've come up with for myself can help in different types of goals. So I hope you come away from this episode with a few new strategies and new things to try to get yourself ready for that Milonga night. And as always, it is a fact that there is a range of experiences. Some of us are very extroverted and we're very comfortable being around a lot of people. Others of us are much more introverted, and we have a hard time in large groups and settings where there's lots of people and lots of noise, and we tend to sort of want to hide in the background and not necessarily be part of the hustle and bustle. So in terms of how we experience nervousness, it can range as well from anything from a few butterflies in your stomach to a full-on, full-blown panic attack, which I've talked at length about how I myself had to deal with these types of things happening for me when I was first dipping my toe into tango. I was a person very much filled with social anxiety and nervousness, and I had a lot of fear about being embarrassed, of embarrassing myself. And it's funny how those fears form, and I've, since dealing with it, I've gone back and observed in my own lifetime where these anxious thoughts come from and how they formed. And for me, it's always been really scary to have some sort of a wardrobe malfunction. I, I've just been mortified ever since I was a kid. Like the whole thing of your fly being undone and you don't know it. Some people are just like, oh, whatever. I'm like not sleeping afterwards. And I remember when I was in middle school, I actually went to a private middle school in Dallas, Texas called First Baptist Academy, believe it or not. And we had to wear uniforms, which was my first time in my life having to wear a uniform. It was kind of silly, but sometimes we'd get to dress up. And I remember this one time that I wore a wraparound skirt that was long. It went down to my ankles. So it was very conservative. And this is a religious, Baptist school. So those things were important. And modesty and being proper and appropriate were values instilled in me. And I, at the time, was very concerned about not fitting in and making a fool of myself. So I was very quiet. Those of you listening who are immigrants or for whom English is your second language or, not your first language, maybe it's your fourth language, but you'll understand that feeling of just not even speaking up because there's so much fear that I'm just going to make a fool of myself. So I might as well not say anything. So that was the state of mind I was at during that time. And I remember during this one day when I was wearing this wraparound skirt, we were asked to get into groups and discuss a project that we were working on in one of the classes. And for this portion, we actually sat on the floor. And it was me and 3 other people. 2 of them were boys, and 1 of them was another girl. And at some point during our powwow, I see the 3 kids kind of looking at each other and laughing. And I'm kind of like, what are you guys laughing at? And they won't tell me. And so there's this awkward moment that I've always been afraid of, and it's happening. And we were then called back to go back to our desks. And right as I'm about to get up, I realized that my skirt, because it's a wraparound skirt, there's just this portion that's not really attached by buttons or anything. It's just wrapped around. So when I was on the floor, the skirt sort of parted, exposing the full length of my thigh. I mean, talking about exposure. So it kind of goes up to really high. And so I realized what happened. And I was beyond myself. I was mortified. I think the rest of the day was a blur, and I came home and I cried, and I was so embarrassed and I was so ashamed. And I think it's one of those experiences that tends to define so much of later experiences as a young adult. And this was a source of anxiety for me for many years, that I somehow, without knowing, have made a fool of myself. And that's extended to being afraid of people seeing me dance as well, right? Like that discomfort, which I've actually been hearing about. Other people share that for some people, they love the idea of being watched when they're at the Malanga. For other people, it's so anxiety-filling, that idea that as you're dancing, somebody else might be watching you and they might be judging your movement. Oh, scary thought, right? And so for me, that definitely was a huge mountain, Mount Everest, to climb, to sift through the layers of this fear. And I'll tell you. Um, it's funny how that works because it seems like the universe is very kind in bringing us just the right types of experiences to sort of poke us into, convincing us into dealing with them. And so, with all of my fear of exposure and making myself inappropriate, I actually did have my worst fear come true. And it was a performance, one of the very, very few performances I've ever done. And I wore a dress that was not mine. It was loaned to me, so I hadn't tested it, which is cautionary tale here. Always test the dresses, especially the ones with slits in them. Just the other day, actually, I was at the Malanga, and this woman was wearing a dress that was very modest when she wasn't in an embrace, and it just looked so nice and proper. But then when she reached up for this embrace and the partner was much taller, and her dress, the fabric was actually kind of stiff, so it just sort of lifted, and there was just this one little slit, and here she is, I'm seeing her ass cheeks, and that's just the reality of what happens at Amrulanga. And she keeps trying to pull it down, and I'm like, I totally know how that feels. And that's what I'm saying, like, you gotta check. If you, ladies, my advice, if you get a dress with a slit, even if it seems like there is no way that it's going to expose or ride up very high, sometimes the fabrics that you get, the way they act when you move, is very different. So always check. So anyway, I was performing, and that's what happened to me. The slit was actually too high. And there's a video of me dancing and, total ass hanging out of my dress in the middle of a performance. Oh my God, I was mortified. But, at that point, it was so absurd. It was like the worst of the worst of the worst. Like, what else could be worse than that? That on the dance floor with the spotlight on me and everybody's watching, and, you can see the color of my thong. At that point, I think I had this, it was so much, it was so much shame that I think it just sort of pushed me in the opposite direction, because I was like, all right, well, that's the worst that could happen. And it happened. And I think I just sort of let it be. Thankfully, people who saw the performance later did not mention that part, even though I kind of like, oh, my dress was riding up too high. Most people said like, oh, I didn't notice. And I was very grateful for that. But it's funny how those things make us really nervous, and it's definitely a source of nervousness. And which reminds me, actually, recently, and this definitely changes or shows how I've changed, but recently I was at a marathon and I was wearing a shirt that was sort of asymmetrical. This episode is becoming about wardrobe malfunctions for some reason. But anyway, I had this asymmetrical top, and when I lifted my arm to take the embrace, there was definitely like side boob going on. And I knew that, and I was okay with it. But then somebody came up and told me, and they were like, just so you know. And how did I feel about that? I mean, I was just like, oh yeah, I know. And it wasn't a big deal. But like, I guess the point I'm making is I went from, really being nervous and afraid of this and having a lot of anxiety about it, to now it's kind of like, oh, it happens. I mean, it's just a reality. It doesn't happen to guys because, as you notice, different dress code. It's very rare that guys will have a malfunction like that unless it's like a fly being undone or something. But for women, there's a lot of opportunity for us to expose. So, coming back to this idea that there's a range of opportunities and experiences when it comes to nerves, and everybody feels it. And I would even say that if you don't have any of that at all, it's kind of boring, you know? I feel like after dancing for so long and being in this community on the West Coast for most of my dancing years, so I know a lot of people here and I've been around, it's rare for me to really feel nervous. And at this stage, and I'm curious to hear from others of you out there who've been dancing for a long time, it's almost like I'm seeking it out. I'm seeking out a place where I feel a little bit of that edge, because it makes things interesting. It makes things uncertain, and there's a little bit of danger. And so whatever level of nervousness you experience, you may find comfort in the idea that that's just part of the experience, that everybody feels it. And I would even say it's good. It's good that you feel it. You should feel it. That means you care. It means there's something at stake, that there's obstacles to overcome perhaps. And on the other side of those obstacles, of overcoming them, lies your own earned empowerment. Because when you face your fears like that and you have these experiences and move on, and you can see that life goes on, things are okay, there's no punishment, whatever it is that we're afraid of, that when that doesn't happen, it's a feeling of like, oh, okay, I can handle this. So there's a variety of experiences when it comes to nervousness, anxiety, social anxiety, panic. And then there's obviously different types of strategies of dealing with that. And as always, I'm going to say that there's not a right way to solve it. Everybody's going to be slightly different. You're going to have your own ways of dealing with it. But again, like in my previous episodes, I always say, your question is, what is going to make you feel more empowered on the other side of your strategy? So that's how you can tell whether a strategy is working for you or not. For me to rush off and never show my face again, which is what I wanted to do the first time my exposure happened in my middle school. It's like I didn't want to go back to that school the next day. I wanted to just disappear. That strategy might not work. I mean, you might be able to do it for a little while, but eventually you have to face it again, right? So there's ways that you can soften the blow. And I'll tell you, with this whole idea of even seeking out nervousness, I had this experience recently where I scored a dance. Like, this was a definite score, because this is a very high level professional dancer that I know who is fantastic. She's a beautiful, beautiful dancer. And I still get a little nervous when I try to capaceo advanced followers. And so I've tried to catch her eye multiple times on many occasions. And either she's not available, she's already dancing, or she's talking to someone, or it's just not the right tanda. So this time I went for it, and she accepted, and I took the embrace, and I had that feeling of nervousness, partially because it was new and because I really respect her, and of course that always adds to that, how's this going to go? But also because I realized she dances very differently from what I'm used to. Her technique was different. It was a little unexpected. And so here I was in this feeling like, okay, first of all, the tanda that I chose was not my favorite. It was not an orchestra I would have liked to dance with her. It's not my favorite orchestra in general. Those of you curious, it was Donato. And Donato, he's fine. There's some songs I really appreciate, but most of the time the songs that get played by him are the really amped up, sort of energetic ones, and those songs are not my favorite. So I'm dancing a tanda that's not really my favorite with a person who's really good, and then I realized that I'm sort of having to adapt and change how I'm interacting with her because she's not doing what I'm expecting. And then, of course, is the thought of thoughts. She's gonna hate me. She's not gonna like what I'm doing. I don't dance like her partner. She probably is not enjoying herself. I am being very boring. I don't know that much. She probably doesn't like my technique. Like, all of that stuff is happening at the same time. And it was very interesting to observe all of these thoughts and all of the emotions that are sort of swirling around inside of me. And my response was very different from what it would have been years ago. And it was this feeling of like, oh man, well, if I'm going to fail, let me just fail big. Let me crash and burn with style. Let me not leave anything untouched or unturned. Like, let me go for it. Because at that point, I was sort of not attached to ever dancing with her again, because it didn't feel like a blissful, joyful experience. It felt tough. It felt challenging. It felt like I wasn't good enough. But at the same time, it was an invitation to sort of say, I know I'm not that good, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Watch me. And in the end, we danced one of my least favorite songs ever. It was the last song. And typically when I hear the song, I sit it out. Anytime I hear it, typically I hear it as the first song of the tanda for some reason. So I always sit it out. But this song, I was dancing with her, and it has this passage at the end that's sort of very unique and stretched out. And by this point, it's the last song of the tanda, and I'm just dancing with her, and I have this concept. I just go for it. I go for it, and I go into this state where I don't know what happens next. There's so much possibility of bumping into other people, of falling. It's a whirlwind, and it's just moving so fast. And all of the emotions that I'm having, they're all there, all the fears. And it was triumphant, to say the least. The last 20 seconds of this song, it was such a thrill to experience all of that together, and I think I wanted to share that because I believe that the reason why I was able to have this experience is not because there's something special about what I'm doing. It's just that I've done it a lot. And over time, there's a different relationship that forms to these experiences of panic and nerves and fear and self-doubt. And it just comes from doing it again and again and again, and just allowing yourself to bite off a little bit more than you can chew, a little bit more, go out a little bit more on a limb. And it just can be a little bit. But over time, you start developing these different skills. So, in order for us to progress towards that, I'm going to share some of my favorite tools that I've used to keep myself pushing ahead and facing my different layers of fear that I've had. And I've talked some about what you can do at the Malanga, and I will talk about a few things here that I've noted to share. But today, I also want to talk about what you can do before you go out. Before you get to the Malanga, there are things you can do to help yourself feel more confident, more relaxed, less nervous. And some of these I think are really fun. So I hope you try some of them and share with me what that does for you. So, first of all, you want to be in a good mood. And you want to be in a mood that is sort of fun and contagious. Whatever that means for you, you know, that lighthearted sort of I'm having a good time mood. You don't want to go to the Malanga with the expectation that the Malanga is going to give you that mood. You want to get to the Malanga already being in that mood. So to that end, you can do different things that might be useful for you when you want to get into that mood. For me, I watch a lot of times, not all the time, but I typically will watch something funny before getting ready. So these days, when I get ready to go out at night, I have to really prep all day because I tend to get tired really early these days. I'm an early riser, so whenever I go out to dance, I have to prep myself. I have to have some coffee. I have to psychologically sort of tell myself I'm going out. Otherwise, come 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I just turn into a pile of nothing and fall asleep. So I drink some coffee and I watch something funny. For me, Sex and the City has been my go-to. I've rewatched that show so many times. I don't even know how many times I've watched it all the way through from start to finish. I just finished again recently, and I think I'll start again in a little while. So I watch something funny. I'll have it on, I'll have a little bit of coffee, and I'll get myself to laugh. Just like something lighthearted, because that, makes me want to look forward. It makes me look forward to the time I go to the Malanga. If you can manage to hang out with some friends beforehand, that's even better. So if you have a girlfriend, some of my very favorite times going out has been having girlfriends over at my house and we get ready together, listening to some music, put on some upbeat stuff, not tango. Don't listen to tango music. Unless that gets you in the mood. Unless that puts you in a good mood, then listen to it. But I typically like to listen to something different, something upbeat, poppy, rock and roll, disco, something that, brings the vibe. And that's been really great to have people over to do it together or to go out to dinner first. So music is a big part of my ritual. So whenever I do go get ready in the bathroom, I'll typically put on some Madonna, early Madonna, not too early, not 80s Madonna, more like early 2000s Madonna. And I get ready listening to that in the bathroom and I sing along. And singing along with your favorite music is actually a really great strategy of getting yourself in a good mood, something that really gets you going. And so typically when I get in the car, I'll put on some good music and I'll sing along and I'll party it up a little bit by myself before going in. And that overall puts me in a really, really good mood. And it gives me the opportunity to come in to the Malanga as if I've already been partying, as if I already am having a good time. And now this is the icing on the cake. It's a really great way to enter the Malanga And even if you're a little bit nervous, there's already this momentum of fun energy that you'll have around you that other people will feel. And it really helps to sort of join the flow of the milonga in a really smooth way where it's not like you're going in and you're wondering if somebody's going to dance with you or people are going to talk to you. People will have to talk to you when you're in a good mood and you're projecting that and you're sort of smiling and having a good time. Like, people can't help it. They're going to want to talk to you. Now, the other thing I used to do a lot, and that really helped me get my sort of tango body on and my tango movement, and I still like to do this sometimes, is before I go out, I watch one or two performances by dancers I really enjoy. I'll just put on one of my favorites, watch it. Sometimes I'll watch it a couple of times, or maybe I'll watch it slow motion. And I find that I actually dance better. Maybe not objectively. It might not actually improve my dancing that much to the person watching me, but I feel a lot better. I feel like I'm dancing better. And ultimately, that's what matters, right? What matters is that you feel better about your dance. So those are the things that you can do before you go to the milonga. And I suggest that if you tend to get nervous and you have those experiences of like going to the milonga just not knowing what to do, then try out some of these strategies, and maybe you have some of your own that I haven't mentioned, and I'd love for you to share those with me. Now, once you're at the milonga, there's already episodes that I've done sharing some practical advice here, but I'm going to reiterate a few that have sort of risen to the surface, the ones that are really most effective. And one of them is something that I learned recently, and I've been testing it, and other people have tested and told me that it does work. And this particular strategy is good for dealing with the nerves that make you shake. So when you take that embrace with someone that you've wanted to dance with for a long time, and you're starting to shake, or you're really nervous, or you just feel like you're all out of sorts and your heart rate is going up because you have all these thoughts in your mind about how bad you are. So what you can do is a thing called a physical sigh. A physical sigh is a type of breath that literally slows down your heart rate. It seems to be the only direct, effective way that you can change your heart rate in real time through breath. Okay? And it goes like this. You inhale twice and then exhale. So you inhale to the top of your lungs, and then you inhale a little bit more, and then you exhale it all out. So it's going to sound like this. So it has that two-part of the inhale. And the whole idea is that you inhale as deeply as you can, and then inhale a little bit more and hold that for a second, and then exhale. I've used that now several times. The last time I used it actually was at my last rehearsal. Some of you remember I told you that I'm part of an orchestra now, and so the last rehearsal, I'm like shaking, my hands are shaking, I'm so nervous, I have so much adrenaline going, and I tried it. I just did this, inhale twice, exhale, and I did it a couple of times, and it really, really helped. I don't know how much it lowered my heart rate, but I know that my hands stopped shaking as much, so something worked. The second piece of advice I want to give you is make light of things. Joke about things. Joke about your own nervousness. That's kind of my strategy sometimes, is if I'm really feeling out of place and I feel like I'm sort of weird, I'm feeling weird, I will kind of seek out a conversation with someone and share it with them. Maybe I'll share it with my partner. I'll even say, like, I'm just so nervous. Isn't that weird? Do you remember being this nervous? And, if you can make light of it and expose it, it sort of loses its grip on you and can shift. Because a lot of times, that feeling of shaking, it's like the energy is so pent up in the body, it needs to be released, right? It's like that charge is seeking some sort of release. And so this is one of the ways that you can do that, is just by making light of it and talking to people about it. Now, the other thing is more of a mindset as well, that I think is a good one to practice in general, even if you're not necessarily nervous. And that is, I realize that we go to the Milonga to dance, but I think sometimes we get so attached to the dancing that if we don't get the dancing, then we're nervous and we're panicky that we're not getting what we're supposed to, and we're not dancing as much, and it's all terrible. And then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We just, dance even less. So I recommend when you go into a Milonga, just kind of have it in your mind that you're not that concerned about the dancing. It's like, whatever, dancing. I'm just going to come over here and sit and talk to people. In fact, when I first get to the Milonga, I've made it a practice that I sit out the first, one or two tandas and just watch and observe and see what happens. Sometimes I'll strike up a conversation with someone, or it's basically opening up to something different versus coming in, putting on my shoes, and immediately, scoping out my next dance. So you can sort of use some of these strategies, but the goal, I remind you again, whatever you choose, the question is, what can make you feel more empowered and more confident? Confidence is what we're sort of building here through all of these strategies, because once you have confidence, you can do anything, really. And it applies both in life and in tango. So all of the skills that you're building in tango are actually very applicable in life as well. So you can see the equivalent in your life based on what I'm telling you to try out in tango. You can try all of these in your daily life and see how it works for you. And one thing that I feel gets very much overlooked, including for myself, sometimes I don't have a good handle on this for me, and it affects my experience. I think that confidence is so much reliant on our body language that you might have a lot of charisma and confidence internally, but if your body does not show it, then you're not going to get very far. It's kind of hidden. You might actually repel people with your body language. And I had to learn that myself. So thinking about your posture and how you come across to people, if you're sort of wondering how to relate to people better and get more dances and connect with people, observing your posture, observing your habits of movement. That's been a very rich area of study for me, for my own body, because there's some photos of me actually from years ago when I first started tango, and one of the things that I'm mortified by when I see these photos is just this sort of collapsed chest look, just slightly shoulders forward, sort of guarding the front of my body, being sensitive and self-conscious about the shape of my body, and sort of, you know, it's like I'm wearing the clothes, I'm wearing beautiful clothing, but I'm actually sort of hiding inside of it, or I'm trying to minimize something about the way I look. And it's so unconscious, these things. They're so unconscious. And I feel like we betray so much about what's going on inside by our body language. So when you are at the Malanga, tracking for yourself, what does your nervousness and your feeling of panic, how does it impact your body? Because you might be feeling the nervousness and you might be dealing with it internally, and you might be running through some scripts or trying some strategies, but then your body language might be sort of locked up. And if that's the case, a lot of these strategies won't work. So that's a big insight there for me that I learned, because it still happens sometimes that I'll be, sitting there having a good time, and then somebody will be like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay? You look upset." I'm like, "Really? What? How?" But I think it's, a resting bitch face. I have one. I know I do. So, for me, I've had to become more aware of it and learn to watch myself, learn to observe myself. And I also am aware that there is a preconditioned behavior for women in general, that we are perhaps more prone to watch ourselves and be very paranoid about what we look like, and is everything okay? Am I being proper? So I definitely don't recommend this being some sort of like a rigid thing that you have to do. One way that you can think of it is that if you were to see yourself and how you would want to appear to yourself, and what would that look like? And for that, I have one of my absolutely favorite little tricks that I use, and that is I tend to like to choose avatars, some sort of archetypal character that when I look at them if I look at them on a computer screen or in a magazine, I look at them and they give me this sense of like, oh, that's what I want to be like. And so I have several that I call up based on the situation. One of them is Vivian Leigh in Gone with the Wind, when there's that scene where she is not expected to be at a party. And at this point, she's kind of like, everybody admires her and hates her at the same time. And the doors open, and she's wearing this feathery red dress that I don't even know how she walks in it, but it's stunning, right? And the doors open, and everybody stops and looks at her. And she just has this look and this posture that you can see her strength in that way of like, she might be freaking out on the inside, and she knows that nobody wants her to be here and people are talking behind her back, but she's just gonna like walk in, saunter in with a completely calm face. And that's gonna be that. And so sometimes, when I need it, when I'm sort of observing myself going down a certain rabbit hole of negativity, I'll be like, okay, here's that Gone with the Wind scene. Sometimes I call that up. Other times, Marilyn Monroe has been a huge inspiration for me, and some of you know that. And I love imagining her in one of her movies and the way she says things and how she makes light of things. And so I sort of call up that character to my mind. And when I think about how I want to come across to people and how I want to attract people to me, I think of Marilyn Monroe. How did she do it? And so for you, you might have something else. I have one for leading, and some of you know this, that whenever I think about my leading avatar, I frequently mention Clark Gable. You can tell Gone with the Wind was a big part of my childhood. It's my mother's favorite film. And I loved Clark Gable because of his mustache. At that time of my life, I really loved mustaches. And so there's that scene of Clark Gable. First time when he's in the movie, he's resting his arm on the stairwell, they're on the banister or something, and he's looking up and he's got this smirk on his face. And so I think of that energy, that when we are in a social space, it's like that's the game that we play. We present ourselves a certain way. We create characters. We express our uniqueness through our own language, through our own fashion, through our own taste. And it's not true to say that our goal is to aspire to be like someone else, or that it's all about becoming good in this one particular way and that's what's going to get you the dances. It's not that narrow. There's people with great technique and great dance skills and they don't get any dances. And then there's people who are not that great, not that good looking, their dancing is not that fabulous or anything, and they're dancing all the time. So there's more to that, to overcoming that nervousness. There's a path through that, and on the other side of it, there's this playing field where you're using nervousness to your advantage. You're sort of using it as a fuel to get to the next experience, the next level, and opening up different possibilities. So I hope this episode inspires you to try out some new things, and I would love to hear what you decide to try out and how it works for you. And if you have some of your own insights, I would love for you to share those with me. You can reach me on social media at imsotango, or email me at connect@imsotango.com. Do remember that on January 14th, Saturday, 2 p.m., we have another seminar with Maestro Horacio Godoy. If you haven't ever taken a lesson with Horacio or been to any of his seminars, you owe it to yourself to come. He is a brilliant dancer and teacher, and he's just such a genuinely warm and entertaining person. So it's definitely a must if you have never experienced it before. All right, I'll leave it at that. Have a wonderful week ahead. Happy holidays. Those of you celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas, and we will continue our banter next week. Ciao.